The old picture of Neanderthal is a cartoon, a clumsy, hairy brute standing in a cave pointing at a mammoth and grunting. A fire meat, that's the image we all grew up with, a dead end on the evolutionary tree. A failed version of us. They were strong, sure, but they were simple, silent. And then they disappeared, replaced by the clever, talkative newcomers us. Homo sapiens. But that picture is wrong. It's profoundly, fundamentally wrong. Over the last few decades, a revolution has been happening in our understanding of Neanderthals. It's been quiet, happening in labs and at dusty dig sites, but the result is a complete rebranding of our closest extinct relatives. The new picture shows a people who were intelligent, adaptable, and deeply human. And this new picture forces us to ask the biggest question of all. Could they actually talk? The answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's a detective story. The evidence is scattered across time, buried in bone, coded in DNA, and hinted at by the things they left behind. And when you piece it all together, the conclusion becomes almost unavoidable. The question isn't really if Neanderthals could talk anymore. The real question is, what did they talk about? To start, you have to look at the body itself. Speech is a physical act. It requires a very specific set of anatomical tools. You need lungs for air, a voice box larynx to make the basic sounds, and a vocal tract your throat, mouth, and nose to shape those sounds into words. For a long time, scientists thought this was a smoking gun against Neanderthal speech. Based on early, flawed reconstructions of their skeletons, they argued that the Neanderthal larynx was positioned high in the throat, like a chimpanzee's or a human baby's. A high larynx severely limits the range of sounds you can make, especially the key vowel sounds like ah, e, and u that form the basis of all human languages. With an anatomy like that, they argued, Neanderthals would have had a clumsy, nasal, and very limited range of vocalization. This idea held on for a long time. It fit the brute narrative perfectly, but then came a discovery in Israel in a place called Kibara Cave. In 1989, researchers found a Neanderthal skeleton that was remarkably complete. And it included one tiny crucial bone, the hyoid. The hyoid bone is unique. It's a small U-shaped bone that sits in your neck, but it doesn't connect to any other bone. It just floats, held in place by muscles and ligaments. It acts as the anchor for the tongue and a key support structure for the larynx. Its position and shape are critical for speech. Without a modern-looking hyoid, you can't have a modern-looking vocal apparatus. And the Kibara hyoid was, for all intents and purposes, identical to yours and mine. This was a bombshell. It directly challenged the idea of a high, ape-like larynx. A modern hyoid implies a modern anatomical setup for the whole voice box. Suddenly, the physical argument against Neanderthal speech was turned on its head. The bone itself suggested they had the basic equipment to produce the same range of sounds that we can. Of course, critics pointed out that finding the bone doesn't prove they used it for speech. A pig's hyoid is also quite similar to ours, and nobody thinks pigs are discussing philosophy. But it was a necessary piece of the puzzle. Without it, the case for speech was weak. With it, the door was wide open, but the anatomy story doesn't end there. Another piece of evidence comes from an even more unexpected place, the inner ear. Speech isn't just about making sounds, it's about hearing them. Your ear is tuned to hear certain frequencies better than others. It's no coincidence that human hearing is most sensitive in the exact frequency range of human speech. It's an evolutionary feedback loop. We evolved to produce sounds in a specific range, and we evolved to hear those sounds with incredible clarity. So, what about Neanderthals? Scientists used high-resolution CT scans to create detailed 3D models of the tiny bones of the Neanderthal inner ear. They could then run simulations to figure out what frequencies their ears were best at hearing. The results were stunning. The Neanderthal ear was optimally tuned to a frequency range that was almost identical to that of modern humans. This range is different from that of chimpanzees and older human ancestors. Their hearing profile was perfectly suited for picking up the subtleties of spoken language. Think about that. Why would a species evolve the specialized ability to hear complex vocalizations if nobody was making them? It's like finding a high-end radio receiver designed to pick up FM signals in a world where everyone is supposedly only using Morse code. It strongly implies that the signals were already there. Their ears were built for listening to speech. There's more anatomical evidence. Speech requires incredibly fine breath control. You have to exhale slowly and steadily to string words together into sentences. This fine control is managed by a large number of nerves that run from the brain, down the spinal cord, and out to the muscles of the chest and diaphragm. In humans, the channel in our thoracic vertebrae, the part of the spine in our chest, is wider than in other primates to accommodate this bigger bundle of nerves. When scientists looked at Neanderthal vertebrae, they found the same enlargement. They had the neurological hardware for the kind of precise breath control that talking requires. When you put it all together too, the hyoid bone supporting a modern larynx, the inner ear tuned for speech frequencies, and the spinal column capable of fine breath control, the anatomical case becomes very powerful. The physical body of a Neanderthal was not a barrier to speech. It was built for it. But the body is only half the story. The brain is the other half, and brains don't fossilize. So how can we know what a Neanderthal brain was capable of? One answer is genetics. The mapping of the Neanderthal genome in the 2010s was one of the great scientific achievements of our time. And buried in that code was a clue directly related to language. It's a gene called FOXP2. In the media, it was sensationally dubbed the language gene. That's an oversimplification, but it's not entirely wrong. FOXP2 isn't a gene for language. You don't just have it and suddenly start talking. It's what's called a regulatory gene. It helps switch other genes on and off. And it's crucial for the development of the neural pathways that allow for fine motor control. In humans, people with a rare mutation on the FOXP2 gene have severe speech and language disorders. They have trouble making the small coordinated movements of the lips and tongue needed for clear articulation. The interesting thing about the human version of FOXP2 is that it has two key changes, two mutations, that are different from the version found in other primates, like chimpanzees. These changes seem to be critical for our linguistic ability. So, the big question was, which version did Neanderthals have? When scientists finally sequenced the Neanderthal FOXP2 gene, they found the answer. They had the exact same two changes that we do. Their FOXP2 gene was the human version. This was another huge piece of evidence. It meant that Neanderthals had, at a genetic level, the same fundamental wiring for the fine motor control of speech that we possessed. Evolution had equipped them with this crucial tool. The genetic potential for language was there. This discovery, combined with the anatomical evidence, made the case for Neanderthal speech almost overwhelming. They had the body, and they had the key genetic underpinnings, but even with all this, a skeptic could still argue. Sure, they could have talked, but did they? The final, and perhaps most compelling area of evidence comes not from what Neanderthals were, but from what they did. Their behavior, their culture. Language isn't just for gossiping, it's a tool. It's the ultimate tool for teaching, for planning, for cooperating, and for building a shared reality. If Neanderthals were living complex lives that required these things, it's very hard to imagine them doing it with just grunts and gestures. Let's start with their tools. For a long time, Neanderthal tools, known as the Mousterian industry, were seen as simple and static. But we now know that's not true. They used a sophisticated technique called the Levallois method. This wasn't just grabbing a rock and knocking a flake off it. It was a multi-step process that required abstract thinking and foresight. Imagine a block of flint. A Neanderthal toolmaker would have to first shape that core block in a very specific way, preparing the surface. They would have to visualize the final flake that they wanted to create while it was still part of the larger rock. Then, with a single precise strike, they could detach a perfect flake that was sharp and ready to be used as a spear point or a cutting tool. It's like a 3D mental puzzle. You have to follow a set recipe of steps. It requires planning. Now, how do you pass that skill down through generations? You could try to teach it just by showing someone, but it's a complex, non-obvious process. It would be incredibly difficult and inefficient. It's much, much easier if you can use language. No, not that side. Strike it here at this angle. See how I prepared the platform first. The Levallois technique is what archaeologists call a cognitively demanding technology. The ability to create these tools consistently across thousands of years strongly implies a robust system of teaching. And the most efficient system of teaching is language. Then there's hunting. Neanderthals were not timid scavengers. They were apex predators. They hunted big, dangerous game. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant bison. You do not hunt a mammoth by yourself with a pointy stick. This requires a group, and group hunting of dangerous prey requires a staggering amount of coordination and planning. You have to find the animal. You have to communicate its location. You have to formulate a plan of attack. Who will drive it? Who will corner it? Where's the kill zone? You need to communicate silently during the stalk, and then instantly and clearly during the chaos of the hunt. Now, to the left, watch out. Simple grunts and hand signals are not enough for this level of complex, high-stakes cooperation. The ability to consistently bring down prime-age, 10-ton animals suggests a communication system that was fast, flexible, and precise. It suggests language, so they had complex tools and they were expert hunters. This shows a high level of intelligence and cooperation, but the most human thing of all, the thing that is most deeply tied to language, is symbolism. Symbolism is the ability to make one thing stand for another. The word rock is not a rock. It's just a sound. But it represents the idea of a rock. All language is built on this foundation of shared symbols. If you can find evidence of symbolic behavior in Neanderthals, you have found evidence for the very type of thinking that makes language possible. And we have found it. We have found it in abundance. For years, scientists thought symbolic thought was the sole property of Homo sapiens, something that appeared in a great leap forward around 50,000 years ago. But the evidence now shows that Neanderthals were engaging in symbolic behavior long before that, and long before modern humans arrived in Europe. They used pigments at numerous Neanderthal sites. Archaeologists have found chunks of red and yellow ochre and black manganese. These minerals were often scraped and ground, clearly processed for use. What were they using them for? The most likely answer is body paint, or decorating hides or tools. This isn't a functional activity. Painting yourself red doesn't make you a better hunter. It's a statement, it's about identity. It says, I belong to this group, or I am in mourning, or I am a great hunter. It's communicating an abstract idea using a symbol. They made jewelry. At a site in Krapina, Croatia, dated to 130,000 years ago, researchers found a set of eagle talons. At first, they were just thought to be food scraps, but closer examination showed they had cut marks and polish marks in very specific places. They had been deliberately modified to be worn, probably strung together as a necklace or a bracelet. Why wear eagle talons? Because eagles are powerful, impressive animals. Wearing their talons is a symbolic statement about your own power or status. This is not about survival, it's about meaning. They deliberately buried their dead. This is a big one. For a long time, it was debated whether Neanderthal burials were intentional or just accidental rockfalls. But the evidence from sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and La Chapelle aux Saints in France is now clear. They dug pits. They placed bodies inside them, often in a specific flexed position. At Shanidar, one burial was found with clumps of pollen, suggesting that flowers may have been placed on the grave. The act of burial is profoundly symbolic. It shows a response to death that goes beyond just disposing of a body. It implies grief, respect, and maybe even a concept of an afterlife. It's a ritual. And rituals are shared social behaviors that are built on and reinforced by language. You need language to create the stories and beliefs that give a burial its meaning. And perhaps, most shockingly, they may have created art. In a cave in Spain called Cueva de los Aviones, archaeologists found perforated seashells with traces of pigment on them. These were clearly personal ornaments, a kind of Neanderthal bling, dated to 115,000 years ago. That's tens of thousands of years before modern humans are thought to have reached the area. In another Spanish cave, there are red painted lines on a stalagmite formation that have been dated to over 65,000 years ago. The artists could only have been Neanderthals. Even more impressive is the structure found deep inside Bruniquel Cave in France. Someone, 176,000 years ago, went deep into the darkness, broke off hundreds of stalagmites, and arranged them into two large circles on the cave floor. It's a deliberate, complex construction. We don't know what it was for. A shrine? A meeting place? But it is unquestionably a symbolic act, a modification of the natural world to create a place of meaning. When you take all this together, and the use of pigments, the making of jewelry, the deliberate burial of the dead, the creation of abstract designs, it paints a picture of a people who lived in a world rich with symbols. And a mind that can think symbolically is a mind that can use language. The two are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. So, the case is closed, right? They talked. The evidence from their bodies, their genes, and their behavior all points in the same direction. But it's not quite that simple. This is where the debate has now shifted. The question is no longer if they talked, but how they talked. What was their language like? It's a question we can probably never answer for sure. Language doesn't fossilize. But we can make some educated guesses. Some researchers believe their language might have been just as complex as ours, with full grammar and syntax. Others suggest it might have been different. Maybe it was a proto-language, more like the simple sentences of a toddler, with words for mammoth and spear and go, but lacking the complex grammatical structures for talking about the past or the future, or for embedding one idea inside another, e.g., I think that the spear you made is sharp. Some have even suggested that Neanderthal language might have been more musical, more tonal, using pitch to convey meaning in a way that most modern languages don't. This is pure speculation, but it's based on the idea that their brains and cultures were different from ours, so their language might have been different too. Not necessarily better or worse, just a different solution to the problem of communication. The final mystery is if they could talk, and they were so intelligent and adaptable, why did they disappear? Why are we here and they are not? The old answer was that we, Homo sapiens, swept into Europe with our superior language and cognitive skills and simply outcompeted the dumb brutes. But the new evidence makes that scenario seem very unlikely. The truth is probably more complex and less dramatic. The arrival of modern humans coincided with a period of intense climate instability. Neanderthal populations were already small and scattered. Perhaps the newcomers brought new diseases. Perhaps we were just slightly more efficient at extracting resources, or had slightly larger social networks, which gave us an edge over thousands of years of competition. There was no single event, no great war between the grunting Neanderthals and the eloquent humans. It was likely a long, slow process of absorption and replacement. We know there was interbreeding. Most humans outside of Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. They didn't just vanish. A part of them lives on in us. So, could Neanderthals talk? All the evidence says yes. They had the anatomy to produce complex sounds. They had the hearing to perceive them. They had the key gene associated with the motor skills for speech, and most importantly, they lived lives that would have been almost impossible without it. They taught their children how to make complex tools. They coordinated to hunt some of the most dangerous animals on Earth. They cared for their sick and elderly, they buried their dead, they adorned their bodies and created symbols to give their world meaning. These are not the actions of silent, simple-minded creatures. These are the actions of people with complex inner lives, with social bonds, with culture. These are the actions of people who had something to say. We will never hear their voices. We will never know the stories they told around their fires, the names they gave their children, or the words they used to describe the world. But to imagine them as silent is to deny the evidence. It is to cling to the old cartoon. The reality is far more fascinating. They were another kind of humanity walking a parallel path. And that path was not a silent one.